They say blood is thicker than water. But no one ever mentions that some blood can poison you from the inside out. I was 23 when I discovered that my parents had been using my name as collateral for their risky business ventures. And 28 when I finally understood that the most expensive lesson in life isn't always the one you pay for willingly. This is the story of how I learned to choose my own family. One that wouldn't sell my future for their present comfort. 5 years ago, I walked into my parents' luxurious home office in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, with what I thought was exciting news about my college graduation plans. Instead, I walked into a nightmare that would reshape every relationship I thought I understood. The mahogany desk where my father Rick conducted his real estate business was covered with documents I didn't recognize. And my mother Sharon was pacing nervously by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked their perfectly manicured lawn. "We need to talk," my father said without looking up from the papers. His voice carried that cold, authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. The one that meant questioning wasn't welcome. My mother forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I felt my stomach drop before I even knew why. What I learned in that room changed everything. They had used my name, my social security number, and my credit to co-sign a massive business loan without my knowledge or consent. Worse, they had embezzled funds from their business partner, using me as an unwitting accomplice. The documents spread across that desk weren't just contracts. They were evidence of fraud that could destroy my future before it even began. "You used me as a pawn," I said, my voice shaking as the magnitude of their betrayal sank in. "If this goes wrong, my entire future is ruined." My father's response was swift and cold. "That's the price of living under this roof." "Did you think everything was free?" My mother, ever the manipulator, tried to soften the blow with false sweetness. "Sweetheart, we're family. Family helps each other. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." But it was already complicated. They had made it complicated the moment they decided my trust was worth less than their financial gain. When I threatened to tell their business partner the truth, my father's mask of civility finally slipped completely. The slap across my face echoed in that expensive office like a gunshot. And the words that followed cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. "You're no longer my daughter. Get out of this house and never come back." He threw a handful of cash at my feet like I was a beggar on the street. "This is all you'll ever get from us. Now go learn to live on your own." I left that house with nothing but my old Honda Civic, a wounded pride, and $800 in crumpled bills. The girl who had walked into that office believing in family loyalty walked out understanding that love should never come with conditions that compromise your integrity. The first year was brutal. I rented a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood in Tempe, working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. During the day, I waited tables at a diner near Arizona State University. Evenings, I cleaned office buildings downtown. Weekends, I started refinishing furniture I found at garage sales and flea markets, selling the pieces online for small profits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And every dollar I earned belonged to me alone. That's where I met Ben. He was a contractor who had been hired to renovate the diner where I worked. And he noticed the small wooden jewelry box I'd restored and brought to work. It was nothing special. Just an old cedar box I'd found at a yard sale. But I'd spent hours sanding it down and applying a hand-rubbed finish that brought out the natural grain of the wood. "You did this yourself?" he asked during his lunch break, running his calloused fingers over the smooth surface. "This is incredible craftsmanship." Ben became my first real customer, commissioning me to restore an antique rocking chair that had belonged to his grandmother. That single project led to others. And slowly, word spread about the girl who could take broken furniture and make it beautiful again. It felt symbolic somehow. Learning to repair things that others had discarded or broken. Over the next 2 years, Ben and I grew closer. He helped me move to a better apartment, one with a small garage where I could set up a proper workshop. He taught me about different types of wood and finishing techniques. And I taught him that patience and attention to detail could transform something worthless into something precious. We fell in love the way furniture gets restored. Slowly and carefully, with attention to every detail. By my 26th birthday, my refinishing business had grown into something real. I had a website, regular customers, and enough income to rent a small warehouse space in Scottsdale. Ben and I found a run-down house in an older neighborhood, and we spent weekends transforming it into something beautiful. We painted walls, refinished hardwood floors, and created a life together that felt solid and real in ways my childhood home never had. The house became my showroom as well as our home. Customers would come to see examples of my work displayed throughout the rooms, and many would end up commissioning pieces after seeing how restored furniture could bring warmth and character to a space. I specialized in pieces that others might consider beyond saving. Furniture that had been damaged or neglected but still had good bones underneath the wear. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, 5 years after I'd been thrown out like garbage, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's voice was sickeningly sweet, dripping with the false warmth I remembered from my childhood. "Brittany, sweetheart, I know it's been too long," she began, and I could practically hear her forcing tears into her voice. "I'm calling because we're in trouble. Honey, the business failed. Your father had a heart attack, and we're about to lose the house. We don't have anyone else to turn to." Every word was calculated, designed to pull at heartstrings I thought I'd severed years ago. She painted a picture of desperate parents who had learned from their mistakes, who were sorry for what had happened, and who just needed a temporary place to stay while they got back on their feet. We were wrong. Baby girl. We know that now. But we're family. And family is all we really have in this world. Could we maybe stay with you for just a few months, just until we figure things out? Against my better judgment. Against every instinct that screamed danger. I felt something soften inside me. Maybe people could change. Maybe the years had taught them something about the value of relationships over money. Maybe I was being given a chance to be the bigger person, to show mercy to people who had shown me none. When I told Ben about the call that evening, his reaction was immediate and firm. "Be careful. Brittany, snakes don't change their nature just because they shed their skin." We had our first real fight that night, with him insisting I was walking into a trap and me accusing him of being cynical and unforgiving. But doubt had been planted, and I found myself calling my best friend Jessica, who had become a successful lawyer in Los Angeles. I told her about the phone call and my mother's claims, and Jessica's response was swift and professional. "Let me do some digging before you make any decisions. Information is power, and you need to know what you're really dealing with." 3 days later, Jessica called me back with news that made my blood run cold. She had used her investigative resources to uncover the truth behind my mother's sob story, and what she found was worse than I had imagined. My parents hadn't failed in business. They had dumped every dollar they could get their hands on into my brother Leo's harebrained schemes. Leo, who had always been the golden child, had convinced them to invest in everything from cryptocurrency to a food truck business that never materialized. They had sold their house months ago to pay his debts, and they were currently living in a cheap rental apartment that they were about to be evicted from for non-payment. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. They had attempted to open credit cards in my name using my current address. Applications that had been rejected only because of fraud protection measures I didn't even know I had. They hadn't learned anything from our last encounter. They were still trying to use me as their personal bank. Jessica emailed me copies of all the documents she had gathered, credit applications, eviction notices, and bank records that painted a clear picture of people who had learned nothing from their past mistakes. I sat in my beautiful home, surrounded by furniture I had lovingly restored, and felt the familiar pain of betrayal wash over me again. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't a naive 23-year-old who still believed in fairy tales about family loyalty. This time, I had tools, resources, and most importantly, I had learned to value myself enough to protect what I had built. I decided to give them exactly what they had given me 5 years ago, a harsh lesson in consequences. I called my mother back and told her that Ben and I would be happy to help, and I invited them to come to dinner on Sunday to discuss the details of their stay. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona sunshine that makes everything look deceptively beautiful. My mother, father, and Leo pulled up in a rented BMW that probably cost more than their monthly rent. A pathetic attempt to maintain their facade of success. I watched from my window as they stood on my front porch, taking in the renovated 1,962nd ranch house that Ben and I had transformed into something special. During dinner, their true nature began to emerge like ink spreading through water. Leo, now 26 and still living off our parents' diminishing resources, started making suggestions about my investment opportunities. You know, Brittany, you're sitting on a gold mine here, he said, gesturing around the dining room where several of my restored pieces were displayed. Property values in this neighborhood have skyrocketed. You could sell this place, take the profit, and we could all invest in something bigger together. Family business. You know? My father nodded enthusiastically, his alleged heart problems apparently not affecting his appetite for scheming. That's smart thinking. After all, this is family property in a way. You wouldn't have the foundation to succeed without what we gave you growing up. I smiled and excused myself to get dessert, returning with Jessica's folder of documents instead of pie. The moment I placed those papers on the table, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Foundation? I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Is this the foundation you're talking about? Leo's gambling debts? Credit card applications in my name? Eviction notices? The color drained from all three of their faces as they realized their carefully constructed lies had crumbled. My mother immediately switched tactics, bursting into theatrical tears and babbling about how they were desperate, how they never meant to hurt me, how family should forgive and forget. My father tried a different approach, slamming his hand on my dining room table and demanding to know how I dared to investigate my own family. You have no right to spy on us. We're your parents. But it was Leo who made the biggest mistake. Seeing the evidence of their deception laid bare, he lunged forward to grab the documents, as if destroying them would somehow undo the truth. Ben, who had been silently supporting me from across the room, stepped forward and firmly blocked Leo's path. Don't touch her, Ben said quietly, but his voice carried the kind of authority that made Leo step back immediately. I stood up slowly, feeling calmer than I had in years. The scared 23-year-old girl who had been thrown out of their house was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to value herself and protect what she had built. 5 years ago, Dad, you threw money in my face and told me to get out. I picked up every one of those crumpled bills and used them to build this life. None of this is family property. It's mine. I earned it. I built it. And I protected it from people like you. Now I want all three of you to leave my house. Immediately. They didn't move at first, apparently unable to believe that their manipulation tactics had failed so completely. My mother continued her weeping performance. My father blustered about respect and family obligations, and Leo muttered threats about what I would regret if I didn't help them. I walked to the kitchen and returned with my phone. You have two choices, I said calmly. You can leave now, voluntarily. Or I can call the police and show them these documents detailing your attempts at identity theft and fraud. Choose quickly. The sight of me dialing 911 finally broke through their denial. They left in a storm of curses and threats. Their rented BMW speeding away from my house like they were fleeing a crime scene. In a way, I suppose they were. After they were gone, I followed Jessica's advice and took steps to protect myself from any future attempts to use my identity. I placed fraud alerts on my credit reports, notified the authorities about the attempted identity theft, and sent copies of the evidence to their creditors with a clear message that I was not responsible for their debts and would prosecute any further attempts to involve me in their financial problems. 6 months later, I received a text from a distant cousin telling me that my parents and Leo had moved to Nevada to escape their creditors, and that Leo was finally working a real job for the first time in his adult life. I read the message, smiled briefly, and then deleted it. Their problems were no longer my concern. That evening, Ben and I hosted a barbecue in our backyard for the family we had chosen, Jessica, Ben's sister and her husband, our neighbors who had become close friends, and several of our regular customers who had become part of our extended community. I looked around at the faces of people who valued and respected me, people who celebrated my successes instead of trying to exploit them, and I felt a deep sense of peace. Later, as I was cleaning up, I found myself in my workshop, running my hands over a piece I was currently restoring. It was an old oak dresser that someone had painted over with thick white paint, hiding the beautiful wood grain underneath. The process of stripping away those layers was tedious and sometimes frustrating. But gradually, the natural beauty of the wood was emerging. I realized that my life had followed a similar pattern. The toxic relationships and false expectations that had been painted over my sense of self-worth had been slowly stripped away, revealing something stronger and more beautiful underneath. The scars were still there, like the small dents and scratches that gave antique furniture its character. But they no longer defined me. Ben found me there an hour later, sitting quietly in my workshop surrounded by the tools and projects that represented my independence and creativity. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me and took my hand. We sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had learned that the best families are the ones you choose, and that love should always make you feel more valuable, never less. As I locked up the workshop that night, I thought about the girl I had been 5 years ago, broken and discarded like a piece of furniture someone had given up on. But just like the pieces I restored, sometimes being broken isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of becoming something even more beautiful than you were before. I had learned that blood might be thicker than water, but chosen family is thicker than both. And unlike the family I was born into, the family I had built would never try to sell my future for their comfort. They would help me build it instead, one carefully crafted piece at a time.